morning. Welcome to Undisputed. It's Friday. How are you guys doing today? I'm with Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, and I'm ready to get this show going.
So am I, Jenny. I am so ready to get going. I can't wait, Skip Bayless.
Shannon Sharp, you've been in trouble all week, and I believe you're going to be in more trouble starting right now.
Well, hopefully Sunday, after Sunday, which will be one of the happiest days of my life, we can stop this blasphemy of one GOAT James. That's what I want to happen.
Oh, Shannon, you have been defending your guy all week. Good news for us. We also have Eric Dickerson joining us later on in the show. But you know what? Only appropriate that we start by talking about Michael Jordan and those Bulls, because it's hard to believe, but we are going to see the end of The Last Dance. It concludes this Sunday, and Skip, you taped a social media video to be released on Sunday afternoon in which you go into great detail about two big one-on-one interviews you did late in the Bulls' 98 season with GM Jerry Krause and head coach Phil Jackson, both of which you said blew your mind. So, Skip, I want to ask you your final takeaway from covering the Bulls in 1998 and that season.
Jenny, in all my years in this business, I've never found myself in something so baffling, so confounding, so troubling, and ultimately so mind-blowing as what I found myself in the middle of in 1998 as the columnist for the Chicago Tribune, watching The Last Dance from the inside out. Big sit-down interviews in late March with Jerry Krause, the GM, and then in early May during the Charlotte playoff series, big sit-down in Phil Jackson's office with the coach of the Bulls. And what I heard from each of these two men, whose relationship obviously had completely deteriorated, was just difficult for me to process. And I remind everybody, I had just come to Chicago before that season, straight from Dallas, Texas, where I'd written 3 books about the Dallas Cowboys. The second of those books predicted that Jerry Jones would soon fire Jimmy Johnson. That was after their first Super Bowl. Obviously, they won a second together, and then Jerry fired Jimmy, as my book predicted in the final chapter would happen. Everybody told me I was out of my mind then, but I said, no, this is predictable. That blow up I got. This one I still can't get. And Shannon, here's the point. During that playoff run, I caught Michael after one game, and I told him that Phil was just openly saying, and we were all presuming, that if Phil got fired, if his contract didn't get renewed, and we knew that was going to happen because he and Jerry had fallen completely apart, that everybody presumed that Michael was going to go too. And Phil was openly saying to everybody, including me in that big sit-down interview, that Michael had run out of gas in 1998, and because of his loyalty to Phil, he was just going to flat out retire. Remember, we're talking about the greatest player who ever played in any team sport, willing to walk away in the heart of his prime, or at least at the end of his prime, and missing his age 35, 36, and 37 season by just sitting out, which is what he ultimately, as we know, did. But when I asked Michael about Phil's contention that Michael would just up and retire, Michael really coldly replied to me, that's Phil's opinion. And that was the first sign of life and hope that I heard from Michael Jordan. And it made me very happy because there was no reason for Michael to go too. And as we all know, Jerry Krause had plucked Phil Jackson out of obscurity. He was a coach in the CBA for the Albany Patroons, hired him as assistant coach. Then when Phil kissed up and buddied up to Jerry Krause, Jerry fell in love with Phil and finally replaced Doug Collins with Phil Jackson. Doug had coached Michael for 3 of his early years. And yet, once Phil got hold of the reins of the organization and they won their first championship, Phil completely turned on Jerry. He had just duped him to get the job and began to mistreat him just the way Michael and Scotty shamed and ridiculed little tiny, the penguin, as I called him, Jerry Krause. So Jerry Krause was livid and wanted to get even with Phil. We get that. And he already had a handshake agreement with Tim Floyd from Iowa State to be the new coach of the Bulls. So I publicly encouraged Michael to just forget about Phil, forget about Tim Floyd, as they called him Pink Floyd off the rock group. That was their sarcastic term for him because Phil loved Pink Floyd. And I thought Michael could then go to Jerry Krause and say, hey, look, I realize the bridge is burned between Jerry and Phil. I got it. That they'll never coexist again. So let's forget about Phil, but don't give me Tim Floyd or Pink Floyd. Give me a real coach. Bring back Doug Collins. Obviously, Doug ultimately went with Michael for his last hurrah years, 38 and 39 years old in Washington. Give me Doug Collins back. Give me anybody who's a made man in the NBA as a head coach, anybody with credibility, stature, and experience, and I'll go forward. Why Michael wouldn't do that to this day haunts me, because that was the move to be made. And I believe Jerry Reinsdorf would have compromised with that move. Keep Jerry Krause as the GM, bring in another coach that Michael signs off on, not Tim Floyd. But as we all know, Michael stuck by his guns inexplicably, which is why I can't wait for maybe episode 10 of The Last Dance. I want to hear what Michael says about this, because I wrote to conclude my column in May and June that year. I said, the worst sports thought I could ever think is Michael Jordan gone at age 35 and Phil still coaching at 53. And as we all know, Phil went right on. It took 1 year. He went right on to the Lakers and wound up coaching Shaq and Kobe to 3 straight championships. And what did I always call Phil? Everybody called him the Zen master. I called him the spin master. I never trusted him. I never trusted his sort of Svengali hold over Michael. Michael was very impressionable when it came to Phil, and I believe that Phil talked or almost duped Michael into retiring out of loyalty to Phil when he did not need to. Phil didn't retire. Phil went on and won 3 more championships in a row with Shaq and Kobe. He had a 3-peat in L.A. So I believe that Michael also got taken for a ride by the spin master, as I call him. And in the end, it was the most confounding and actually the saddest story I've ever covered.
Well, to your point, let me start with your point before I make mine, Skip. The reason why he didn't talk to Jerry Krause, because Jerry Krause and Jerry Reinsdorf was 2 people that he couldn't bully. Because you know why, Skip? They had more power within the organization than him. See, you can bully Steve Kerr and Scotty Burrell and some of those others because they're a player. You are the best player, so you have you're able to reign over them with your tenure, with your play. But you notice he can never bully Jerry Krause. Every player that he basically said he wanted, Skip, and this is documented, Jerry Krause went and got somebody totally opposite. If Jerry Reinsdorf, and like I said, Jerry Krause took a lot of criticism, took a lot of heat, but Jerry Krause was just a shield. This was Jerry Reinsdorf, because he could have made all this a moot point. He could have said, Jerry, you're going to stand down on this. We're going to keep this thing rolling until the wheels fall off. But when Jerry Krause went to Jerry Reinsdorf and says, this is what I want to do, okay. You see what happened, Skip? It happened again, rest his soul, with Abe Polian in Washington. You see, when people have more power than you, you can't bully them. That's why he couldn't bully Jerry Krause. He could have, like you said, he could have, but he knew what the answer was. Jerry Krause made it abundantly clear. He can go 82-0, win all of his playoff games by 30, and he's still not coming back. And if Michael retires, Michael's earned the right to do whatever he wants to do. So it was a moot point. So he was like, I'm not wasting my time, because there might be a time later in life I'm going to need that energy. I'm going to need that breath that I wasted on Jerry Krause and Jerry Reinsdorf. That's why he didn't do it, Skip. You know why he didn't do it. because he couldn't bully them. He couldn't put them in a corner like, hold on, Skip. Well, I thought winning. So you mean to tell me he said winning, and if you don't want to win, get out the way or move and don't do it? Jerry Krause said, nah, we good here. Skip, look, at the end of the first three-peat, he said that he was exhausted. He was tired. The media barrage, the constant criticism. And it has started to, they started to say, well, what happened with your father was a direct correlation of what was transpiring with Michael in his personal life. I don't believe that, but the constant criticism. Skip, you mean me the toughest, the most mentally tough guy in the history of sports couldn't handle media criticism? Wow. Imagine what he would have to go through in the social media age today. Imagine what LeBron James hears constantly. There was no debate shows. There was no 24-hour news cycle on sports in 98, 97, when Michael was in his heyday, in his prime. Can you imagine the criticism if some of the things that was reported, going gambling, Skip, the day of, what was that, the night after or the day before playoff games or the constant golfing. Can you imagine the criticism? Imagine a player now, Skip, in basketball, say it be LeBron James or Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and that would be caught in the casino before a championship game or after.